connection's not that great. So as soon as I finish setting this up, we'll be on our way. Let me turn off the sound off this thing. There we go. No more sound. All right, what are we going to be working on today? Guys, let me know what you want to talk about. So I end up doing that. In the meantime, so let me actually fix this up because it's still quite messy. I still have all the bolts from the LS stuff just chilling here. So I gotta move all of these coils out of the way. Gotta figure out what I'm gonna do with them now that I've got the Daytona coils. I don't really need the stock ones, but I'll probably put them away somewhere. I've got 8 of these little fellas. So I was modifying the secondary plates. This is a 67. I have a bunch of extra 67. So I went ahead and I was testing out modifying these like the idle feed restrictors. So you could drill these out, tap them. I think this one's a 630 seconds, 630 or 628. I gotta check. But you can tap them, and then you can run the set screws in here, and then drill them out to whatever you want. I think the max I've been able to go on these has been 65 before you start away at the edges, like where you actually run the. So this one, I think I went a little bit too wide, so maybe 65 isn't exactly the best one to go with. But if you want to go something smaller than 65, you're probably good to go. See, like this one just kind of spins in place. So that's probably a big reason why people don't drill these out. I have a stroker pushing 700 horsepower. My question is, does your AFR gauge for very lean for, if you said before it comes back to normal around 12 and a half? Are you talking about wide open throttle? For a few seconds before it comes back to normal around, or are you like, what do you got to do to create that condition? 700 horsepower. Okay, so you're at wide open throttle. Is it like in between shifts, or is it like in the middle of the RPM range, and then toward the end of the RPM range, it goes back rich? You also didn't mention if it's mechanical secondary or vacuum secondary carburetors. Those do tend to function a little bit differently. So as answering like specific carburetor questions are always like dependent on what the application is. So the more details that you can give me, the easier it will be to try to narrow down you're having, so we can identify the circuit. You can tell me, what do you got to do to actually cause that condition? You mentioned wide open throttle, so let me know exactly what you got to do, and then after you can tell me how you can replicate that, we can identify what circuits are being active during that time, and then we can try to figure it out. Like in 4th or 5th, when you punch it, it goes lean. It's an 850 double pumper mechanical secondaries. Okay, so on the initial, so let's say you're rolling in 4th or 5th and you stomp on it. Let me ask you this as well. Is it a manual transmission or an automatic transmission? Because I've seen the carburetors respond differently depending on the transmission. Well, actually, you said 4th or 5th, so I'm assuming it's a manual transmission. So, but then there are some 5-speed automatics, so it is a little, let's see, manual. Okay, it's a T56. Okay, so you're in 4th gear, you're cruising, you're rolling, and then you stomp on it, it goes lean, and then it'll start picking up. So that's a pretty normal condition, because when you stomp on it, let me grab a carburetor for This one's a double pumper. So when, let's say you're cruising, right? So you're in the primaries, you're just cruising along, and you go to like merge, or you go to overtake somebody, or you go to get on the freeway, and you stomp on it. So now you've introduced all of this extra air, but because the carburetor runs on vacuum, it takes time for air to start pulling fuel out of the fuel bowls and then start flowing through all the circuits the way it needs to. So it'll probably take a second or two before fuel actually starts flowing. 850 double pumper. That's a really big Venturi. Is there a reason you went with an 850 over a 950 HP or XP? HP. I forgot which one it is. The one that has a 750 Venturis but an 850 base plate, that it actually flows like 830, but it responds way better than an 850. So I'm curious about that as well. But that also has a little bit to do with it. The smaller the Venturi, the easier it is for fuel to get pulled through the Venturis, through the boosters, because obviously less air can travel through it at once, so it ends up pulling fuel easier through the entire circuit. But the best way to, because going lean isn't good at all. So I would definitely start investigating what kind of. Actually, I'll ask you right now, what accelerator pump do you have on the secondary side? Is it like a regular pink cam like this one is, or do you have like a white cam, or a blue cam, or do you have a 50cc? Let me know on that one as well, because if you're only seeing that lean condition when you stomp on it going into the secondaries, you could probably benefit quite a bit going into a with 700 horsepower. That's a lot of power. That's a lot of air flowing through the carburetor. So you can help alleviate that lean condition by switching out the secondary accelerator pump, going to a 50cc accelerator pump on the secondary side. Aside from that, switching out the main body for a 750 main body, but that's a different discussion altogether. But I think if I'm understanding you correctly, it's only going from cruise to instant wide open. And I bet you, if you were to go from cruise and then you gradually open it to wide open, like if you're just cruising along and you're just like brrr, you probably wouldn't see that lean condition. I can almost guarantee that. And if you do happen to see it when it's just entering the secondaries, that has a lot to do with the transition on the secondary side. But a lot of times, it's usually just at wide open throttle, and it's usually just for a second, and it's while the accelerator pump finishes feeding it and the boosters start to catch up. So if you know what cam is in here, we can see if you're good to go for an upgrade. It's a custom built carburetor by Gary Williams for my Texas Mile car. I'll go look at the cams and be right back. Okay, yeah, go ahead and check that out. I'm not familiar with that builder. I'm familiar with a couple different builders. I'm not familiar with that one in particular. I would assume that if you custom built it for your car, it should be pretty spot on. But a lot of builders, and I'm not throwing shade at carburetor builders. I'm actually gonna make a video on this. A lot of builders, they design their carburetors for wide open throttle and racing performance. So from a standstill, or from even you just loading up your car at on the two-step or on the transmission brake, you're pretty much already at wide open throttle. Carburetor's already good to go. Everything's stalled up, and as soon as the green light hits, your carburetor's already good to go. He builds the street outlaw guys and several drag. That's really cool. I'll look into that guy, Gary Williams. That's interesting. I'm wondering if it's. I don't think it's an issue with the carburetor. I think it just needs a little bit of fine tuning. One of the best in the country. I'll look into that. He seems like a pretty cool guy to look to see what he's doing. What kind of pump I got this one? This is a base plate for a double pump. I have actually no idea what kind of cam's in here. Oh, it's like a modified pink cam. and this one. Yeah, so find out about that secondary cam. Yeah, so this one is this is a 650 double pumper. And then I've got the 575 that's here. This is the carburetor that I wanted to run on my truck before I blew up the rear diff, and now I'm just waiting on a new set of gears so I can build that again. So on this one in particular, there's nothing special about the front, but the rear allows me to have the provision to install a secondary metering plate. And so what I plan to do, or what I was planning to do, was to actually take advantage of all the extra metering plates that I have, the ones that are designed for like this one's a 67, so the idle circuits travel all the way down. So this one will probably match up perfect to something like this, although this is for the secondary side, so it doesn't quite work. But if you mismatch these to the wrong carburetor body, these holes on the corners, they don't get covered up. The idle screws, the idle holes, they won't get covered up. So the whole deal is that, let's see, this is supposed to go like this. So some carburetors will have these holes exposed because this will end up being like on the 64s, it'll be cut up right here, and you won't have, it'll be blocked off like from here. This circuit will tie into this circuit, and this will be cut and blocked off. So if you have a carburetor that requires that type of metering plate, you should stick to that one and just modify it, versus the 67, which I guess required more fuel for, I don't know. But it does pull it off of the transition, and instead of running a secondary metering block, you could just modify one of these, drill through it through the bottom, or another option is to actually block these off, kind of like what I did here, only I need a little bit of, I need to take these back out and put Loctite on them so they don't leak. And then you would go through and you drill here on the bottom, right there. And then you can tap it so you can install secondary jets, and you don't have to install a secondary metering plate. Now, if you need the provision of a 4-corner idle, then yeah, I would probably go with a secondary metering plate. But if you don't really need a secondary metering block, I'm sorry, if you don't really need a secondary metering block, then you can just modify one of these secondary metering plates instead. So I have a bunch of these 67s, like I mentioned, so I'm going to be modifying these. Instead of using these cheapy Chinese Allen keys, I see, look, this one's stripped out too because it's a cheapy Chinese Allen key. But I should, yeah, see, completely stripped. I should be buying the correct socket for this, although this, like, it could also be that I'm using the wrong one. Actually, which one is this one? I can't actually tell which one this is, because a lot of these are either metric or they are SAE, and I have no idea. Looks like it's the pink cam on the secondaries. On the engine dyno, it was even all the way up. So it's probably because getting there all of a sudden just makes me nervous. Yeah, it's not, you're not having from what I can tell, you're not having an issue with the carburetor. It's just when the thing about like dyno pools and street pools is that street pools tend to require a lot more fuel to get going, because on a dyno they'll load it up to a point and you're probably at like half throttle, and then they'll finish up the throttle to get your dyno run, versus you actually cruising in the transition, and you're going from transition to wide open throttle, or sometimes main jets to wide open throttle. So you have to give time for your power valve to start giving fuel. You have to give time for your secondaries to start flowing fuel. And in the meantime, your car's trying to move, but it doesn't have enough fuel to get it moving. So ask your builder, since he built it, ask for his opinion if it's wise to go for a 50cc on the secondary side, because it seems like that's where your problem is. It doesn't sound like you're having any other issue. It's only from like part throttle to wide open throttle, and that would be your secondaries. If you were going from like idling to like tip in, like very light throttle, then I would assume it'd be your primary accelerator pump. But since we're looking at the from like main jets to wide open, I would look at your secondary accelerator pump. So ask your carburetor builder. Uh, looks like ask your carburetor builder what he thinks, but I'm pretty sure because it's pretty high horsepower build, it's going to be flowing a lot of air. I'm pretty sure you're going to be benefiting from a 50cc accelerator pump. I just put up a video on it. Although I installed the 50cc accelerator pump on the primary side, it's the exact same thing to install it on the secondary side. But again, ask your builder if it's a good idea. Since he's the one who built it, you can explain to his situation and explain what I told you and see what he thinks. Like I said, carburetors do respond differently on the dyno versus on the street. On the dyno, it's all very linear. It all responds a specific way. That's why a lot of people, a lot of magazines can do back-to-back carburetor testing because nothing really changes. You're just changing. So all you have to worry about are your jets. You don't have to worry about any other circuits except wide open throttle performance because you're not really driving it on the dyno from transition to wide open throttle. You're usually loading it up, getting it ready, kind of like if it was on a trans brake, and then hitting it. So conditions are a little bit different whether you're daily driving it versus whether you're cruising it versus you're actually racing it. The conditions are going to be a little bit different. And if the difference between being in the main jets, like when you're cruising, and being partly into the secondaries, like when you're on a dyno, is even if you're just a little bit into the secondaries, fuel's already flowing through the jets. Fuel's already running through the circuit. So even if you're just barely into the secondaries, that's just enough to have a clean transition into wide open throttle versus you on somewhat light throttle. Whatever you do, don't be driving around your engine while you're hitting lean spots because you could cause a little bit of knock, a little bit of detonation there, even if it's for just a second. I'm assuming for 700 horsepower, you have a pretty good amount of compression, pretty healthy cam, and a nice flowing set of heads. So, yeah, look into that for me if you can. Infamous Nova, yo, the man of 2022, how are you? It's good to see you. It's been a few weeks. Haven't seen you since my last stream. Okay, so it takes like 3 or 4 seconds to get all the way down to 12 and a half. I probably don't need to worry about it too much. Going back into a rich condition is not the issue. What you want to look at is how lean does it get. If it gets like 13 and a half, I wouldn't worry about it. Even 14, it's probably okay. If you're hitting 15, 15 and a half to 1, anything higher than 15, even 14 and a half is pushing it, but it's still you're still relatively safe. But anything above 14 and a half, you want to keep an eye on, and that's where you want to start pumping in more fuel. If it feels good, if like you don't feel any hesitation whatsoever and it just takes off, then you should be okay. But like I said, it takes about a second or two for fuel to start flowing. As soon as fuel starts flowing, the rest doesn't matter. You're going to get to that AFR range because even though we've got a wideband, it does take a split second for the wideband to catch up. So what you're seeing on the wideband is actually it's a little behind, so to speak. So if it takes 3 or 4 seconds, it probably only takes about 3 seconds, and plus the delay of the wideband. So it does take a little bit of time for everything to kind of sync up. So it just depends. If you're not feeling any kind of hesitation, you should be okay. But if it was me, I would be trying to go for kind of rich hit with the secondaries. I would try to instead of having it go, try to get it as rich as you can when you hit the secondaries. When you hit the secondary accelerator pump, I'd probably want to if you're normally at 12 and a half with that secondary accelerator pump, I want to go all the way down to the 12s. Although with a really high horsepower engine like that, it probably won't. You probably won't be able to flow enough or I'm sorry, you probably won't be able to flow enough fuel through the accelerator pump to bring it all the way down to 12. It's not that much. So there's two different sides of that. That's the squirter, which yours probably has a 32 or a 35, I'm assuming, and then you have the pump cam and the actual diaphragm. So if you just change the diaphragm without changing the squirter, your duration is going to get longer. So you're going to have the same amount of fuel, just longer. So it's a lot of information to go through. So do get your builder, and then actually let me know so I can keep in mind and understand where he's coming from as well. Infamous Nova soon, real soon. Like how soon we talking? Like 2022 or 2025 or 2026? How soon? You've been promising me soon for like the last half year, so it just depends. In the time it's taking you to build it, my truck, and then I broke it. so so I wonder if I can fix it again and then break it again by the time you finish it. Like next week. Ooh, that'll look good. Next week, huh? Yeah, I probably won't get my truck. I blew up the rear diff. If you guys are following me on Instagram, I blew up the rear diff on my truck. Not well. I was being a little bit careless and I wasn't really paying attention, and it started to drive funny, and I just kept driving on it. And eventually, I I haven't opened it up yet, but I think I broke the pinion. I ended up having it towed to my parents' house because that's the address on my AAA. So I have to one of these days I have to go with the trailer, pick that up, and then bring it back home. But the Ford 8.8 did end up blowing up on me. But it I did build that myself, but that was the very first time I ever built a differential, and I know I left more play than I should have, like significantly more play than I should have. But I just kind of wanted to do it. I did that one and I did the front one. The front one I'm not worried about because I only use that when I go off-roading, and I bought the wrong gears anyway, and there's no return on gear sets that are used, so I can't really do anything with that. I'm waiting on a spacer so I can add some vacuum ports. Okay, you're trying to go. You were talking about this last time. Um, is your cam? Did you verify your cam's gonna have enough vacuum at idle or off? Well, off throttle, you're gonna have probably enough. But at idle, are you gonna have enough vacuum at idle to actuate your brakes and stuff? Usually, when you when you're coasting, your vacuum tends to skyrocket to like, well, with the healthy cam, it'll skyrocket to like 16, 18, 20 inches of vacuum. On a stock cam, it'll probably skyrocket to like 23, 25 inches of vacuum, which is why when you coast, your brakes feel really good because you have a lot of extra vacuum. But with the really like high cam engine, I'm wondering if you're going to have enough vacuum. I remember last time you were saying that you wanted to switch over to a like an electric vacuum pump or an engine driven vacuum pump, lack of vacuum in the manifold. That's not specific to carburetors. It's in general. Even EFI applications, a lot of people, or even boosted applications, they have to switch over to either a hydro boost setup or an electric vacuum pump setup just so they can continue having their power assisted brakes. Because as soon as they start installing these super lopey cams, they stop having brakes at low RPMs. Won't have any vacuum. Just got at the electric vacuum pump, but the spacers for the blow off valve and MSD box. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So you're. I mean, you could have just. I don't know if you really wanted to, but you could have drilled a hole in your intake and then ran a tap and like an MPT tap and then run a fitting off of that as well. Location doesn't really matter if you're just trying to pull vacuum. Basically you're trying to get the boost reference for the MSD box, and then the hook up your blow off valve. That's going to be interesting. Um, it'll be fun. It'll be fun with the idea of going turbo myself. Considering I was able to break my diff on it with the stock 5.3, I'm not sure if I want to go turbo just yet. I might want to upgrade my axles, upgrade my five. Oh, I think I broke the transmission as well because I can't go into fifth gear anymore. So when it broke, I was in fifth gear. I was on the highway, and when I pulled over, I was able to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then trying to go into fifth, the shifter wouldn't go in. I don't know. I don't know what ended up happening. When it broke, though, I had just shifted from fourth to fifth, let off the clutch, and when I let off that clutch, that's when the differential gave out. So I don't know if that shock ended up transferring through my shift or my gears, and then ended up chipping a gear or something. Edwin, good night. Good. Just moping here with the rest of these guys, telling them my story about my broken Ford 8.8. So hopefully the transmission's okay. No promises though. If I did end up breaking the transmission, I'm gonna have to scour the junkyard for another transmission. I'm not gonna have that fixed. I was playing with the idea of having it built by Maryland Crawler, but I'd have to get it on the phone with them. But I don't know how much horsepower they could take. If they can say, well, if we build it for you, it can take 600, 700, 800 horsepower, then yeah, I'll go for it. But if they're like, well, it's not really built for that, you really don't want to go boost, then I probably won't subject the R150 to any kind of heavy duty abuse. In reality, the stock 5.3 produces twice the amount of horsepower and over twice the amount of horsepower and over twice the amount of torque to the wheels than the stock 3VZE was producing, and it's probably producing at least 50% more power than a supercharged 5VZ was producing. So the R150 has been holding up pretty good. It's just because the 8.8 probably did something to the transmission. I won't know for sure until I actually start taking it apart. Everything's gonna have to come apart as soon as I get it back to my house. So that's gonna be a few other videos that I'm gonna have to make, unfortunately. And it was running really, really good. When I'm telling you guys that the carburetor was running good, it was running beautiful. After I installed the 50cc accelerator pump I had on the front, and I leaned out the primary jets, and then I leaned out the secondaries quite a bit because the secondaries were just dumping fuel out wide open. I think I was seeing like 9.5 to 1. So those, I dropped those down, I believe 5 sizes in the back, and then that got me to about 12 and a half. And then it was running good. It was running really, really good. I was more than surprised of how well the carburetor was running. And like a day or two later, because I installed I replaced the stock coils on it with the Daytona sensors coils, and that thing made all the difference. Cold starts were no problem with the carburetor. I pumped it. I think I pumped it 2 or 3 times and then just cranked it. I didn't even hold the throttle open. I just cranked it, and it was just purring. It was just quiet. And I also did a 2D timing map on it on the SSLS, and I put 13 cranking 13. I think 15 or 18 at idle, and it was just purring. It was running good. How much those coils run? They're a little bit pricey. I forgot how. I think the MSD ones are like 350. The SSLS or the SS ones, because they're not SSLS, but I mean they're LS coils, but you know, semantics, right? The Daytona coils, I think they're like they were 560. They were pricey. They were expensive little suckers. They were like 560, and then with the promo code that they gave me, you only get the shipping off, which is fine. You end up saving like $20, but I mean anything you buy on Summit, you can get free shipping. So they're pretty. I think they're a little bit over 200. They're either a little bit over, a little bit under, $200 more than the MSD coils. But I'm in a lot of different Facebook groups, and some people, after about 6 months or so, they start having issues where either 1 or 2 of the MSD coils goes out, and each coil is like $80 or whatever. So, and those, I don't know if the actual coils have a warranty on them or not. I know the 6014 does because I've worn it before, but the coils, I'm not sure if they have a warranty. So If anything, they have a 1-year warranty, just like the box. So, but from what I know and from the people that I've talked to, these Daytona coils are supposed to be higher quality. I know they're LS2 style, LS2, LS3 style um, coils. So obviously they produce a pretty good amount of spark. So they could just be um, exa- the exact same thing as LS2, LS3 coils. But I've also noticed that the MSD coils are also the LS2, LS3 style. So they're like in the same casing. And then there's another set of coils, the little square ones. Those are the MSD square ones are kind of a bit of a hassle because those have a very specific pattern on the coils. So the Daytona coils share the same pattern as a truck in the video. So you could just space up the stock the Daytona coils and they'll fit. Same thing with the LS2 style MSD coils. You can stick them on the stock bracket, space them up, and they'll fit because they look exactly the same as the stock Delco coils. The difference between those ones and the square MSD coils is that I believe the MSD coils, instead of being mounted like this, they get mounted like this, like sideways, but the connectors still run like this, so you can't run the coil sideways. So you have to buy a MSD specific. ICT Billet has one that they sell specific for the MSD. They sell valve covers that are designed for that as well. So it's not like it's impossible to mount them, but do be careful when you do end up deciding what kind of coils you want to run. But supposedly, I mean, I've seen people run the stock coils, as provided that the stock coils are in good condition, obviously. But I've seen people run stock coils like 6, 7, 800 horsepower with no problems whatsoever. For me, particularly, it's just these. I know for a fact these coils are over 200,000 miles old. Well, not all of them. Some of them have been replaced, like you can tell. Um, some of them have different part numbers on the bottom. So you can tell that they're not GM coils anymore. I don't know which ones are and which ones aren't. I marked them, but I'm not for them right now. So, I mean, 1 or 2 of them have been replaced before. So I've noticed that, let's see. I wonder if my coil is good. You know, it's really hard to tell. Even on EFI applications, it's really hard to tell if a coil is going bad or if it's a different problem. And I say that because this is a little bit of anecdotal evidence, but I had a 4.6 Mustang for about 6 months or a year, something like that, and the coils would go out. I promise you, they would go out every 2 weeks. I would lose one coil. Um, it 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 would. I'm stuttering a lot. I'm sorry. It was running perfect when I first got it. It was running perfect, and then a couple months I started noticing like part throttle performance. I started noticing a little bit of hesitation. I would be good, and then I'd go to accelerate, and I'd feel a hesitation, and then it would pick up. Why? The funny thing was that wide open throttle performance, it was running good, perfect. But as soon as I would get like part throttle, it started running like garbage. So what I did was I just kept driving it and driving it and driving it until I ended up getting a misfire code, and it was, let's say, misfire cylinder number 4. So then I would go and I would replace the coil on the 4.6 with like a junkyard coil. I ended up getting like a bunch of them, but I only did it one at a time. And then the car ran perfect. And then like a week or two would pass by, and then I'd get that hesitation again, and eventually I'd get a check engine light, and it would be a different cylinder. So then I'd replace that coil. And then I did that. I want to say I did that at least 4 or 5 times. Almost all the coils ended up getting replaced with other junkyard coils. And every time it was the exact same system. But the code didn't come up until way later. So the symptoms start happening before the computer actually starts realizing it. Now, if you've got a carbureted LS or even a carbureted anything running the individual coils, since we don't have any kind of check engine lights, the box doesn't tell you when a coil is bad. If you have never ran your engine and you've got a bad coil or your coil starting to go out, you will have no idea because you could be running on 7 cylinders and you could have no clue. Coils usually, when they're going bad, will run good at idle and at wide open throttle. That's what I've noticed. Part throttle, well, I don't know if they run good at wide open throttle, but you don't notice the hesitation at wide open throttle. You will notice it at part throttle. So what I do now is to check the coils, I turn up the carburetor. I just turn up the screw, rev it up to about 3,000, and then just unplug a coil, and then just compare how much or how little the RPM, or how much or how little the RPM changes depending on it. You can do it at idle too, but I noticed that it's much more significant when the RPMs are a little bit higher. I've When I first installed these LS2 coils though, the Daytona coils, I forgot to plug in the passenger side harness. I bolted everything together and I made sure all the coils were plugged in, but the main harness on the passenger side, I forgot to plug it in. And the truck started. Like, I pumped it 3 times and I went to crank it and I held open the throttle like I normally do. And I went to start it and it started right up. It was like chugging. And then I would rev it up to about 2,000-3,000 and it would clear up. It would sound normal. And then I let it go and it'd be like chugging again. So then I walked around, and then as soon as I thought about it, I was like, oh, I probably left it disconnected. And I checked. Sure enough, the harness on the passenger side was disconnected. But it was so funny that as soon as with 4 cylinders connected, I was able to rev it up and it would rev fine. And that's 4 cylinders only on one side. And I was able to rev it up without feeling any kind of issues. And I did the coil swap and the 50cc accelerator pumps at the same time. So because I took it apart, I was like, oh, did I do something with the carburetor? Maybe I'm whatever, you know? And then after I plugged it in, boom, perfect performance. And from then on, the carburetor is running absolutely perfect. And that is the 750. The 750 that I have on right now. It's too big for the 5.3. I'm 100% sure it's too big for the 5.3. But the 600 that I was tuning before, that was one that I tuned up for a giveaway that I did on this channel, and then I ended up giving it away to my subscribers. Holley Ultra XP 750 E85 on stock LQ4 with cam. It stumbles when you crack the throttle hard. That sounds very similar to what we were talking about earlier about the let me grab a throttle plate. Where are you? Ugh. Yeah, it sounds very similar to what we were talking about. So the engine that we were talking about earlier, it was a 700 horsepower engine, and his problem. Tell me if this sounds familiar. He's cruising. He's just driving around, and then he's in the primaries or in the transition, and then he stomps on it, and then his AFRs will go way lean, and then it'll start as RPMs climb and air starts flowing through the carburetor. It'll start to richen up, but the initial hit, it goes lean. So if that sounds familiar, I recommended him that he should look into getting the 50cc accelerator pump on the secondary side. But the difference between you and him, though, is that you are on E85. So the problem with E85, I mean, it's not a problem, obviously, because E85 is a really good fuel, very resistant to detonation. But the issue with E85 is that to get the same amount of burn, the same amount of power out of E85, you have to run way more fuel through your carburetor. So depending on the type of squirter or the size of the squirter and the size of the cam that you're running, you not only will you have to switch over to 50cc. I'm not exactly sure if you're gonna, let's see, was dropping squirter size and seemed to help, but it's still there. I'm pretty sure when you drop the squirter size, you're increasing the duration. So let's see, do I have a squirter on me? I don't have the squirter on me. So let's pretend this is like your squirter, right? So when you first crack the throttle, or when you step on the throttle, fuel from your accelerator pump is going to flow through the squirter. So let's say originally you step on the throttle, and then fuel is going to start flowing through it, and then it's going to start running out. You're going to start running out of fuel. So the bigger the squirter is, the faster it's going to run out of fuel. So if you have a 35 squirter, it's going to run out of fuel faster. If you have a 32, it's going to take a little bit longer, etc. If you have a 28. So what I'm understanding is that you don't need more fuel, you need a longer duration of fuel. And if you need a longer duration of fuel, you should switch over to a you should definitely switch over to a 50cc accelerated pump, simply because you're on E85. That would be the first one. I think, which one? E85 carburetor. Actually, this one was an alcohol carburetor, so not exactly the same, but this one had dual 50cc accelerated pumps. But this one was on a, I forgot what engine it was, but I think it was a 460. It was a stroker. It was a, I don't know what engine it was, but this thing had double 50cc accelerator pumps. So, but this one was an alcohol carburetor, but it's almost the same thing. Alcohol carburetors and E85, they don't burn the same, but they function very similar. So I don't know what kind of accelerator pump you have on it right now. Do look into a 50cc accelerator pump. Even if you leave the squirter size the same, the 50cc accelerator pump is going to lengthen the duration that fuel is flowing through the squirter size. That's the only reason I can imagine that, because E85 tends to run lean. It's like an oxygenated fuel. It tends to run really lean. That's why on E85 it's super important that you go that, like an E85 carburetor, everything is gigantic. You're running like 100 size 100 jets, 120 jets. I think jets that I pulled out of here were 140, and actually, let's see. Okay, let me grab something real quick so I can show you something. So this is the alcohol carburetor. Not the carburetor, the metering block, and then this is a standard Holley gasoline metering block. So the biggest thing that you guys should see is the orifice size for the jets. So this is an alcohol size jet, and then this is a gasoline size jet. So let me show you the differences. You guys can see that? This is, I think these are size 140. Actually, these are size 180. Yeah, so these are size 180 jets. And then these are size 65, 69. So these are more than twice as big as this one is. So any kind of alcohol, methanol, E85 will require a ton of fuel to get going. So I think the issue on yours lies that you need more duration. And the only way to get more duration when you stab the throttle is to give it more accelerator pump. So a bigger diaphragm, I think, is in order. You'd be surprised how many carburetors how many carburetors that are driven on the street require a 50cc accelerator pump. You don't tend to see this as often on the racetrack, because only on the street you get into these very niche driving scenarios, but you tend to get into them over and over and over again. That requires your carburetor to be set up in a certain way to cover up certain issues that you might have. Versus where you're on the track, you only worry about idle and then wide open throttle. Those are the only things you really worry about. You don't really worry about anything else in general. So I would be looking into that myself. I've built what, 5 carburetors for people, and every single one has required a 50cc accelerator pump. Into it, I appreciate it. Yeah, check it out, look into it. Like I said, on every street carburetor that I've built for someone else, every single time they've always needed a 56 accelerator pump. I've never built an E85 carburetor because I've never dabbled in E85 myself. The time I ever even got E85, it is a drag car. How much of a difference does that make? Not a lot, because let's see. It really depends. You said when you stab the throttle. So when you're drag racing and you're on the trans brake or you're on the two-step, you mentioned E85. So I don't know if you're naturally aspirated E85 or turbo E85 because that also makes a difference. But you just have to make sure that I'm assuming it's a stick car to manual car because those are, yeah, NA. Okay. And is it a manual transmission? I'm assuming because automatics you're usually wide open and on the stall. That's why it has a power glide. Oh, okay, you have a power glide. Okay. Yeah, a lot of the automatics, they are just so good at drag racing because you can just set it up on the stall, full throttle, let off the trans brake, and you're going, you're moving. You don't really have to worry about a lot of issues. That's why a lot of carburetors built for automatics, they have such an easy time tuning it. A power glide, I've heard some stuff about the power glides, but you probably have a similar issue. You just want to identify if the hesitation you're getting is on the primary side or on the secondary side. So if you can, try to get just into the secondaries when you go to launch. Start feeding a little bit of fuel in the secondaries and then go for it. If you're in the secondaries, if you're slightly in the secondaries and you still have a hesitation, look into getting the 50cc accelerator pump for the back. If you're in the secondaries and you don't feel that hesitation anymore, look into getting a 50cc accelerator pump for the front. That's how you can identify. If you feel the hesitation on both, start with the front one, and then if you need to, get the second one. So yeah, it's tuning, street tuning and drag race tuning, they work a little bit differently. Essentially, obviously they're the same carburetors, but they do tend to require to be tuned in slightly different ways because a drag car, you subject it to certain driving conditions that you don't normally go into on a street driven car, and vice versa. I think I mentioned that before today, but mentioning it twice now. So, well, I've got what, 3 of you guys in here. I'm going to be showing off. What am I going to show off? I got this in the mail the other day. I started filming it, but I didn't get a chance. So I'll show you guys. I'll show you guys right now. So it's another Daytona item. This one is a distributor. I started taking it apart, but this is for a big block Mopar. I might have mentioned it last week, but we're building a Challenger, 1970 Challenger with a 440, and I was doing an unboxing as well as a review, and then I was going to do an installation video. So I don't have a stock one to compare, but this one is a big block Mopar. This one's for a 440. The difference between this one and the stock one is this one is, when you remove it, you can, the insides are kind of like an HEI or a Chevy, where you can use these, where are they at? You can use these springs to change the timing curve, make advance it, retard it as you want. So I was going to do that, but then I got to the point where it's time to take the little reluctor off, and I actually got to call customer service because I don't know if I got to undo the reluctor or roll pin or what. Edwin, I have a question. I have that same 750 XP carburetor. I'm able to rev clean, but when I try to take off, slow, bog, and not give me any power, and I haven't hooked up the wideband just yet. Okay, so are you? I'll ask this first. Is this a street-driven car or a drag race car? And when you say take off, are we talking about like you're at a stop sign and you're going to take off, or you're trying to launch and you go to take off? Because you might have the same issue. I don't know what engine you have, so if you want to tell me what engine you have, that'll help me as well. I should probably put this back together before I lose all the screws. Actually, I don't even know where I left the screws. Okay, they're over here. I'm going to put this back together, at least until I call customer service, because I'm going to take this apart and I won't be able to put it back together if I lose those screws. So that's not going to be good. Yeah, Edwin, so give me that information, please, and then I'll hopefully hopefully I don't have to say get a 50cc accelerator pump again. Hopefully it's a different issue altogether. But a lot of you guys are telling me you guys are either getting these custom built carburetors, or you guys are just getting these off the shelf carburetors. And I always preach that off the shelf carburetors, even if they're really good carburetors, they almost always need tuning by the end user, because they're set up for these dyno engines, very specific engines. And when you put them in anything that varies even a little bit, it could, I mean, you have a lot of leeway with the carburetor, but if the specs variate from their test engine, it's not going to perform exactly the same. If the engine that they're testing is really high on vacuum and the engine that you're putting it on is low on vacuum, that's going to make a difference. It's not going to flow the same. And a bunch of other reasons as well. LS3 Nova, regular driven. I can barely get it out of my parking lot. Is it a stock LS3? It seems a little strange. Stock LS3? Where does the screw go? That's not good. I don't know where the screw goes. Huh. I don't know where that screw goes. I think that screw was supposed to go in there. And I might have to finish taking it apart before I can get this anywhere. Yeah, that screw was supposed to go in there. So I'm going to have to finish taking it apart. I'm going to have to call tech line tomorrow, hopefully tomorrow. I'm not exactly sure, though, if I'm going to be able to get them in time, because I do have to go to work tomorrow. And what the squishy thing for? I have no idea. Aftermarket carburetor. Oh, what the heck is this? What is this? Let's see. Oh, one more question. Is this 50cc change just a little diaphragm or the housing also? And my carburetor caught on fire a couple times. Okay. It happens to the best of us, as long as you don't leave it on fire, because it'll deform the boosters. Aside from that, it's okay. When you buy I just uploaded a video on this. I think it's 1 or 2 videos ago. If you want to go ahead and check it. It also has a part number there as well in the video. But when you buy the kit, the Holley kit's really expensive. It's like $65. Let's see. Let me finish up with Rick, and I'll get back to you, Edwin, real quick. The Holley kit's $65, and it comes with the diaphragm, it comes with the housing, it comes with the arm, it comes with the properly sized cam, and it comes with all the screws and everything to put it together. What it doesn't come with is a squirter. You probably won't need to change the squirter if you're telling me that the smaller squirters tend to help and you just need more duration. So what you're probably just going to need that kit. If you buy I don't know how much the squirters are, to be honest with you. They're like $10 or $20, I'm assuming. But if you buy just a kit, you can get it from either BPT, you can get it from AED, you can get it straight from Holley. I think the BPT kits are like $35, the AED kits are like $40, $45, and the Holley kits are like $60. Cheapest I've been able to find. I sourced mine locally, and it was the same price. So whether you get it online or whatever, it'll be the same price. So it depends on what brand you end up going with. It'll be a different option. So let's get back to Edwin. Let's see. So, all right. So we're talking You're trying to get it off, get it out of your parking lot. You're trying to get off idle and start accelerating. You're welcome, Rick. So if you, let's see, I'm trying to think of the scenario, but I know exactly what you're talking about because a lot of people struggle with this, even with their regular engines. So you haven't put even on a wide, even if you install the wideband, I don't think it's going to tell you anything at such low RPMs because it's probably going to say lean anyway, whether you're actually running lean or not. So with your with your Nova, you go to take off from a parking lot, you can go to take off from a stop. You're going to look at two circuits. You're going to look at the accelerator pump and you're going to look at the transition. So when you're trying to take off, let's say you take off, and let's say you can't take off. It's like struggling to take off. It's like hesitating. While it's hesitating, if you stomp on it, you go to accelerate, it picks up and it starts driving basically normally, and then you start slowing down again and it starts hesitating. Chances are your transition's probably going to be too small, or you don't have enough accelerator pump to get out of it. The difference between the two is that accelerator pump is instantaneous, so it doesn't last forever. The condition doesn't last forever. It'll probably last for a second or two, and then your car will start driving. If it's in the transition, as long as you're in the transition circuit, you're going to have that issue. So chances are that your idle feed restrictors on the 750 XP for your particular application might be too small. Do look into that. I don't know if you have wherever you bought it from, you should be able to get a spec sheet that should tell you what the idle feed restrictor size is, and then you can compare that to what everybody else is usually running. I've gone through a lot of different carburetors, and a lot of them either have a 30 or a 28. I've noticed that even stock carburetors, they really like 32 and up. I've even had a 40 installed on a because I installed it on accident. I was supposed to install a 32, and I ended up installing a 40. And it didn't go way rich, but it went significantly richer. It went to like 12 and a half at idle, or at 12 and a half in the transition, but it ran really, really good. So I can imagine that on an LS3 engine, you're probably going to have a similar issue that your carburetor, LS3, I think that's either a 6.2 or a 6.3. It's going to definitely want more fuel than what my 5.3. So definitely look into the size of your idle feed restrictor, and then look into seeing if you're going to need a 50cc accelerator pump. But you won't know that until you know that your transition is rich enough. You can usually tell if it is or it isn't, because if you need to be about 3/4 of a turn off fully closed, three quarters to one full turn off of fully closed on the idle is usually where most engines like to be. The relation to that and to the transition is that if the transition holes are too small, you're going to need more turns out of the carburetor. If your transition is too big, then you're going to need less turns out of your carburetor. So if you're noticing that it needs 2 turns, 2.5 turns to get it to idle correctly, your transition IFRs are probably going to be too small. So you're going to have to go ahead and look into that. It's difficult going into all of that, but once you figure it out, once you dial it in, it should be pretty easy, good to go. I'm trying to figure out how to take this off. I might need my impact driver. If you can look up your receipt, Edwin. If you could look up your receipt and take that part number and look up the the carburetor online, you could probably you can probably look up the specs for it. I probably shouldn't lose this either. It's like a piece of foam. And I definitely don't know what these are for. So I'll need to find that out as well. So let's put this on the side. Let's see if I got any other questions to answer real quick. I've been getting pretty involved with the Daytona stuff. As you guys can tell, I've been putting out a bunch of videos. So last time I got the distributor, they sent me a pack of these. So check these out. Look at all these stickers. So if somebody in the chat wants a sticker, let me know and I will mail it out to you. Whether it's Nova versus whether it's Edwin. I mean, if you're in Mexico, I or Argentina or Canada, I probably won't be able to send it to you. But if you're in the United States and you want a sticker, I will mail this to you for free. Because I don't know what I'm going to do with so many stickers. I only have so many toolboxes that I can put stickers on, and I'm going to put one on the back of my windshield, but I'm still going to be left with an extra 10 stickers or whatever. So somebody hit me up on Instagram. If you want a sticker, I'll send it to you for free. But aside from that, they sent me like a catalog or something too. They're like, hey, you got all this stuff. You want stuff? You want to show off some more stuff? And I'm like, I don't know. Your guys' stuff is pretty expensive, so I don't know if I want to be getting a lot of that stuff. So it's really good stuff. The people that I talk to, they're more race oriented, and they seem to like the Daytona stuff. There's nothing particularly wrong with the MSD stuff. It's just that quality control is just not what it used to be for sure. Off of what you're saying, I think it's my transition because I did have to come off of the screw. So you're saying you have to do a lot. You have to do a lot of turns, like I don't have a flat, but yeah, if you have to do a lot of turns, like a lot of turns on here, chances are your transition is going to be too small. So like I said, wherever you bought it from, it should have. I think Summit will have a whole list. Jegs is better at it, from what I know. Take that part number of your carburetor that you bought, put it in Google, put it in Bing, put it in whatever. Come up a couple different websites. Go one by one, whichever one tells you what the idle feed restrictors are on it. Compare that to what it needs to be. For those of you, I mean, you'll find out what it needs to be when you install the wideband. But lucky if they are than they need to be, it's super easy to drill them out. You can buy. I don't have them here. You can buy individual drill bits to drill them out to whatever you need, whether it's a 30, 32, 34. If once you have your wideband, if you're like way out there, if you're like 60 and a 1, you're probably going to want to up that to like 4 sizes. So from to 34 or whatever, from 28 to 32. That's what would be 4 sizes. 32 to 35 would be 3 sizes. So there's a bunch of like common sizes. It's like 28, 30, 32, 35. And I think that's the reason for that is because the drill bits come in very specific sizes. So I don't think there's a 34, but there's a 34, 349 or 347 or something. And so that'll count as 35. So I think that's why it goes 28, 32, 30, 28, 30, 32, 35. And then after 35, I think it goes either 36 or 38, something like that. But and then after 38 or 36 or whatever, it goes 40. So 40 is a really common size that drill bit. A lot of stock kits. I don't think you're gonna need a 40. Each increase, each 2 sizes that you go up on the idle feed restrictors, you go up about half a point in you either go half a point, 3/4 of a point in your AFR. So if you go from 28 to 30, it's like going from 14 and a half to 13 or 13 and a half. The richer it is, the more it's going to affect you. The leaner you are, the less it affects you. if that makes sense. Because when you are running lean, you're also misfiring, so you're tricking the gauge into reading lean. Misfires also read as lean condition. So when you're lean misfiring, it looks on your AFR gauge like super lean. It'll read like 16, 17, 18 to 1, but it won't actually be that lean, if that makes sense. As soon as you start dialing it in, your AFRs are going to start looking a little bit more consistent, a little bit more normal. If your idle feed restrictors are smaller than they have to be or should be, the drill bits are like $4, $5. If it's like at 28, go ahead and drill it up to a 32. If it's already a 32, drill it up to a 35. And you don't want to go from 28 to 40 because you are just going to dump in a bunch of fuel in your carburetor that you probably won't need. And once you drill too big, you won't be able to go back unless you drill to 6/32 and then run in a brass set screw, kind of like that. You can do it like that. But my favorite thing to do is just to drill up and not worry about drilling and tapping and anything. You want to try to just drill up. You don't want to mess with anything else. Um, but uh, but yeah, carburetor issues. It's not difficult to get your carburetor dialed in. You just have to know what you're looking for. After when you have a wideband attached to your car, after, let's say you take one carburetor and you dial it into your application with the wideband. When you go to dial in a second carburetor, it's going to go so much faster because you're already going to recognize what your engine wants. You already know where you were before, so now you just have to compare that to what you have now. And the initial settings that you had on the previous carburetor, you're going to be able to put them to the new carburetor. And depending if the new carburetor is bigger or smaller or the same, you can just deviate a little bit from what you already had versus trying like a factory 650 and then going and putting on a 750 and then putting in a 575, and you're just like all over the place without doing any kind of modifications and without having a wideband. Some people only have one carburetor and two sets of jets. So if one set of jets doesn't work and the second set of jet doesn't work, what do? Buying another carburetor. And every set of jets is about, like, let's say from a 66 to a 67, it's about half a point in AFR. Once you go below 12, maybe 11 and a half, your engine is going to start misfiring. RPMs are going to go down, which is why when you're setting up your idle, if you're going in too much, your RPMs are going to start dropping because it's going in too lean. If you pull it out too much, RPMs are going to drop because you're going too rich. So once you go beyond that 12, like 12, 11 and a half, once you go richer than that, you start losing significant amount of power. Like, you do not want to be too rich. You lose so much power going down to the 11s, 10 and a half to 1. It is insane how much power you start losing. You do not want to be too rich. You don't want to be too lean. You want to be just right. At wide open throttle, you want to be right around 12 and a half. Cruising around town, you want to be 13 and a half. If you're EFI, you want to be around 14. Well, I mean, you can be 14 with the carburetor too, but the leaner you go with the carburetor, the richer you have to make everything else. So when you go really lean, like 14 to 1, your accelerator pump has to be really fat, has to have a lot of fuel to cover up the lean spots that you yourself create, versus if you had your carburetor set to 12 and a half, you might not need a 50cc accelerator pump. You might just have to increase the squirter or whatever. You might not have to do anything, which goes to what I was talking about earlier in the stream, that depending on what it's built for, you might want to have your idle at 12 to 1. You might want to have your transition at 12 to 1. You might want to have everything at 12 and a half to 1, because the engine runs best at a slightly fat mix, a slightly rich mix, and it's also safer that way. But if you go beyond that 12 and you go down to 11 and a half, you are most likely going to start losing power, and that's when you're going to have to want to off on the jets. But it's so much easier when you have a wideband installed, because you can look at all the data that it gives you, and you can be like, okay, judging by the way this responded and that responded, this is where I have to change it, or that's going to have to be where I change it. Sometimes it won't be in the jet. Sometimes it'll be in your air bleed. Sometimes it'll be in your transition. When you tune individual circuits, it pretty much affects the entire curve. So if you make your transition richer, your main circuit's also going to get richer, because it starts pulling fuel out of the transition as well. So it'll start pulling fuel from, or it does pull fuel from both. If you're making your main jets richer, it probably won't make your transition richer. Um, if that makes sense, because it's like a pyramid. Everything flows from bottom up. So you start off with your idle, then your transition, your power valve sits in there somewhere, and then your main circuit, and then your secondary circuit. But before the secondary jet circuit, you also have the secondary transition, and then you have the culmination of everything at the very peak. So it's kind of like a triangle. But just like a triangle, if you change the jets on the secondaries, it's not going to affect your primary transition. If you change the transition in your secondaries and you don't have a four corner idle, it's not going to affect your idle. So you're going to need to, when you do have a wideband, you can identify specific circuits, and you don't have to really worry about guessing. So when you buy something, or you decide to get something or trade something, you know where to look for. At least you have a general idea of what the cost could be. If you won't just randomly buy a set of jets. If your spark plugs look white, you don't know if you need to go up one size, two size, three size, four sizes on the jets. You don't even know if it's white because of the jets. You could have not gone into the jets and you're in the transition. So there's just too many variables trying to look at a spark plug and read spark plugs on a wideband and be able to identify each individual circuit. Once you do it a couple times, oftentimes you don't even need the wideband to identify problems. I've been able to identify carburetor problems by not having a wideband on other cars, because I've already tuned 5 or 6 or 7 different carburetors on my 5.3. I've gone through the same issues over and over again: lean spots on takeoff, rich hesitation, lean hesitation, popping through the carburetor, backfiring through the exhaust, backfiring on deceleration. I've gone through every single problem at least 2 or 3 times, tuning all these different carburetors. I've messed up. I've made things too rich. I've made things too lean. And when you start tuning with the wideband, what it does, you can create a relationship between what's happening to the carburetor to what's happening on the gauge. So you start identifying, oh, that's a familiar sound. Oh, the wideband says it's lean. Okay, so that's a lean pop. Okay, I'm feeling this type of hesitation. The wideband says it's rich. Okay, so this is probably a rich misfire, or a rich hesitation. So things like that. When you start tuning with the wideband on your carburetor, you can start identifying problems for when you don't have a or on a car. You can, and you're driving it around, and you can identify specific circuits just by driving it around. You know where your foot is. Other people don't. They don't. If they've never tuned a carburetor, they can't tell the difference between a transition circuit and a main circuit. Their foot doesn't know. But when someone's tuning and they tune with a wideband, they can actually hear the difference between transition circuit and main circuit. It's a different sound altogether in the exhaust. Once you start picking up on all those cues, and you start learning from the wideband what each thing sounds like, what each thing feels like, you are going to have such an easy time tuning other carburetors, that even if you don't have the wideband, you're going to be able to recognize symptoms that you had on your own carburetor, reading the wideband, that you're going to be able to most likely fix on other people's carburetors. Then, kind of like what I'm doing right now. You guys are asking me questions, and I'm going off of my information in my head. What circuits you're in, what's happening, at what time, where is your foot in the throttle, what kind, things like that. And getting that information, I can go ahead and translate that information into advice. And I won't just say random stuff like put bigger jets in it, because you know what does that have to do with anything? Things like that. You go on these Facebook forums, and you go onto these like internet forums, and you have these people that have no idea what they're talking about. They think that tuning a carburetor is idle screws and jets, and that's it. And it's really not like that. Carburetors are so much more complicated than a lot of people think, but at the same time, they're so simple because everything's on a curve, everything's on a line. If you have your wideband and you can see the different circuits as you're driving, you can pretty much decide what you want to do and how you want the carburetor to run, versus just having a 600 or 650 and just dealing with it, trying to put bigger jets in it. I see people trying to fix off idle hesitation by putting bigger jets in it. That has nothing to do with anything, and people are actually giving that kind of advice. Sometimes they run their carburetors so rich just to make their off idle hesitation go away, that the car is just like puffing out smoke, and they're like, why is it smoking? It runs good, why is it smoking out the back? And that's because they don't understand the relationship between all the different circuits. And all you guys that are in the chat right now, you guys, I understand that you guys are trying to learn and understand the different circuits yourself. And I'm not trying to throw shade on anybody in particular. I don't know anybody in particular, but I see this so often in the forums, and I see this so often because I go on there to try to help people, and people just jump on. And sometimes if I can get there early enough, I'll offer advice. If the original post has like 50 comments, I'm not even going to bother commenting anymore. But what I will read them. I'll read the comments, and those comments are just out there. I promise you that they are just, if you guys know how to tune carburetors, or after you guys learn how to tune, after you know how the different circuits work, you're going to be like, what are these people even talking about? These are just, these guys shouldn't be offering any kind of advice. And I hate to be so negative sometimes, but I see it so often. So often, the poor advice just keeps getting repeated and repeated and repeated, and it really annoys me. And the best advice you could probably give anybody is get a wideband. Get a wideband. Learn how to tune it yourself, because most of them have no idea what they're talking about. So everybody who has a wideband right here in the chat, I'm super proud of you guys for taking the initiative and getting yourself a wideband. So the EFI guys have information to go through everything on their engine, going through every single parameter. And the AFR guy, or the carburetor guys, the only tool they really have, they have two basically, well, three. Their vacuum gauge, which is actually more helpful than you might think. You have the spark plug reading, which isn't as helpful anymore. And then you have your wideband gauge. Those are the three things you want to be looking at when tuning a carburetor. Those are pretty much the only things you guys can look at. But my office is actually getting really cold, so I think I'm gonna go ahead and call it a night. I missed out on last week's stream, so I'm trying to make it up for you guys. But I'm gonna go ahead and shut down for the night. It's getting really cold in here, and I'm barely getting off of the flu. So I'm gonna end the stream here. I hope my comments ended up helping you guys. See you guys all in the next one.